Just as a quick note to everyone, this lecture is going to be recorded, and the conversation question Q&A session afterwards. So anyways, hi, my name is Dustin O'Hara. I'm the director of the Internet Studies Center here at Western Washington University. The Internet Studies Center aims to foster the sort of interdisciplinary study and design of digital technologies. And the lecture series, we've been presenting, a range of sort of leading scholars and practitioners from quite I think a diverse range of disciplines and fields. Oh, my dog's barking. So anyways, a bit about our speaker today. Miranda Belarde-Lewis is the Joseph and Jill McKinstry Endowed Faculty Fellow of Native North American Indigenous Knowledge and Assistant Professor at the Information School at the University of Washington. Indigenous knowledge systems are central to her work as she examines the role of social media and the arts in protecting, documenting, and perpetuating Native information and knowledge. Belarde-Lewis holds a BA in Cultural Anthropology from the University of Arizona, an MA in Museology, and a PhD in Information Science from the University of Washington. So welcome. Thank you for presenting. It's really great. I'm excited for your talk.
Thank you very much. Let me do this ugly behind the scenes technology stuff real quick and get this set up. You can see the, there you go. Is that correct? Can I get
it looks good. I can see it.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Dustin, for this invitation. It really would have been my privilege to be there on Lummi territory, but today I'm zooming in from the Suquamish and Duwamish homelands here in Seattle. Let's see, today's my talk is the Native Creatives and the Digital Intrusion. This is a slightly misleading, provocative title, but we'll get into that later. During the holiday season of 2020, my husband and son started showing symptoms of COVID-19. They were tested at a drive-through testing station in the Seattle area. The whole process took less than 30 minutes. The hazmated nurses gave us a sheet with precautionary quarantine information, what to do if symptoms did not improve, and attached stickers with their handwritten names next to a QR code to access the test results, sometime within 24 to 48 hours. Even though the quick response or the QR codes were introduced in 1994, this was the first time that I ever felt compelled to download a QR reader onto my smartphone. The ability to constantly scan the code into my phone and to check the results meant the stress was delivered and heightened with the lightning speed of my mobile connection. The use of the QR code to verify or deny one's personal and family status in relation to a global pandemic was a stark reminder of not only the assumed use, but also the familiarity of the QR code and its ubiquitous nature. Those of us familiar with digital technology have witnessed the proliferation of the QR code, whether we use them or not. Native artists have likewise observed and incorporated digital technologies into their work as functional components within immersive virtual or augmented reality simulators, or as a social commentary on the shift in cultural and environmental degradation facilitated by the technological era we're now living through. It feels silly to say this in any context, but it usually must be stated explicitly that Native and Indigenous peoples are no strangers to the intrusions of digital technology. We are immersed in it, we participate in its consumption, as well as critique it, and create protocols to set boundaries on the tech in our lives. Today, I examine how Native artists are making works that examine the digital intrusion that has become as everyday as our air. The technology of focus will be QR codes, virtual and augmented reality. When Denso Wave patented the QR code in 1994, the original intent of the quick reader was to make information accessible. In the spirit of accessibility, Denso Wave chose not to exercise the patent rights, paving the way for anyone to develop their own QR codes, providing a direct link to the information of our choosing. As I mentioned earlier, the ubiquitous nature of the QR code has worked its way into our everyday lives, so much so that many of us view, recognize, and then immediately dismiss the black and white squares that appear on everything from grocery items to ads lining our bus stops. Navajo weaver, teacher, writer, and filmmaker Velma Key Craig, who is on this call today, thank you so much for coming, took advantage of this everydayness. She created a Navajo textile depicting the American flag with a barcode for the stripes and a QR code in place of the stars. The QR code is functional, leads directly to a now defunct real estate listing for a house that was in foreclosure in Craig's Phoenix neighborhood. Craig critically examines the act of foreclosure in relation to housing in the US, an act of snatching back private property if one does not have the funds to pay the mortgage or property taxes. Foreclosure, according to Professor David Titterington, is a uniquely American invention created to deal with the quote, Indian problem as another legal means of land theft, an invention that has destabilized the housing of millions of Americans, native or otherwise. The vivid and globally recognized imagery of the stars and stripes and the promise of a life of abundance is coupled with the literal example of an individual's failure to hold on to a property, an actual symbol of wealth under a capitalist framework. This textile, created in the ancient tradition of Navajo weaving, provides a cynical view of the American dream, a cynicism commonly shared amongst Native peoples. Native peoples are intimately familiar with the broken promises of what it means to live freely in these United States, a cynicism sometimes jarring to those who have not experienced generations of colonization and all the ills that come with it. Craig states, quote, "My version of the flag is not a positive one. It is designed to get people thinking about what should be important to the health of our country," end quote. When asked about the incorporation of technology into a decidedly customary art form, Craig stated, quote, "I have to understand my craft, definitely. I have to understand how to be exact. The only reason the QR code ended up being scannable, even though that wasn't my intention or focus, was because it was woven exactly to scale as the original. That takes a level of skill. I can translate images pretty accurately by making sure my warp count in the setup of my loom is exact, and understanding how to create slopes by varying angles, and understanding yarn compression so the heights of my design elements come out exact," end quote. The level of skill Craig refers to is intergenerational for most Navajo weavers, a technological innovation passed down through careful mentorship and patience. Ironically, by depicting impermanence and instability of foreclosure in relation to American life, Craig was offered her first commission to create another functional QR code textile, furthering her prominence as an artist, another manifestation of the American dream. Aninin beadworker and multidisciplinary artist Mona Cliff describes her practice as being rooted in exploring how Indigenous knowledge systems connect our identity, culture, and life practice to our surroundings. When recounting the inspiration behind these pieces, Cliff was seeking a means of, quote, "providing supplemental proactive information attached to art, especially art that involves social justice," end quote. Acknowledging that many times artworks about social justice do awareness building work, but stop short of pointing out actionable next steps. Cliff recognized the potential of the QR code to be this next step and used the Twitter-generated QR code leading to her direct Twitter feed. Cliff states, quote, "I found this feature to be effective in delivering the message I was wanting to establish, forms of communication through art. Since my primary mode of creating is through beadwork, this leap was a natural transformation," end quote. Cliff's direct-to-Twitter QR code is the centerpiece of a necklace paired with a ribbon work blouse adorned with the same design. The ensemble is titled Tech Traditions. Ribbon work amongst the Gros Ventre and many other Great Plains tribes of the US has long been a regular feature of casual and ceremonial clothing, as well as being a prominent feature of powwow regalia. For Cliff, the use of the QR code was a logical extension of the communicative power of beadwork, stating that, quote, beadwork is in its own form and designs, conveys information in itself, end quote. The communicative properties of the QR code are not lost on Tlingit artist Alison Bremner. The messenger is a non-functional QR code, a QR code-esque painting of an owl. Bremner wistfully states, quote, I wish I was more tech savvy so I could incorporate actual tech into my artwork. So far, I have been using images of technology, the QR code and the emoji, and alluding to technology in other ways, end quote. For Tlingit peoples, the owl has been a messenger since mythic times and does not have the negative connotations associated with death that many other Native communities have. For Bremner, the owl is connected to her clan or extended kinship group in the Tlingit community. By depicting the owl in this format, Bremner further encourages us to recognize the adaptation of digital technologies into indigenous ways of knowing as a simple fact of life. This hybridized style blends the traditional Tlingit formline aesthetic and the omnipresent QR code imagery of manufacturing, marketing, smartphone technology, despite the fact that the image is a non-functioning pathway to digital information. Bremner spent 4 years apprenticing with Tsimshian master artists David A. and David R. Boxley, and is increasingly being praised for her precision in her application of Tlingit formline design. She stated that she finds it, quote, amusing to spend years learning traditional techniques to depict very contemporary or modern images, end quote. True to its nature, I just lost my space. True to its nature, its name and original purpose, QR codes have become synonymous with instant information. They are everywhere around us, and yet they are not famous for being in use, despite the fact that they are on all manner of products and postings. Native artists are using the imagery and functionality of QR codes to insert nativeness into the everydayness, asserting the simple fact that Native peoples are part of the technological phenomenon that is access to instant information. Apache philosopher Viola Cordova wrote about a concept she coined bounded space, describing the deep relationality most indigenous peoples have with their territories and waters, as well as the plants, animals, seasons, and gifts of a specific area of the earth. These territories are naturally delineated by lakes, mountains, rivers, forests, and deserts, with the exquisite understanding that on the other side of that lake, mountain, river, forest, or desert is another set of people residing in deep relationality with their bounded space. How does the philosophical framework for being in relation to the land jive with realities that are virtual or augmented? I'll come back to this question later. True to our human tendencies, especially during late-stage capitalism, this reality is not enough. We have invented virtual and augmented realities. I'm not an expert in these spaces, and I apologize for the oversimplification for those here who do create and study these arenas in depth. But my understanding of them is built largely off of pop culture and Wikipedia. Virtual reality is the use of computer technologies to create a simulated environment. So think of the entire VR worlds that are built and visited by the characters in the film Ready Player One. While augmented realities is an interactive experience where the objects around us are enhanced by computer-generated interactions that include visuals and sound. My favorite example of AR is the mobile phone game Pokemon Go, where players track and collect Pokemon using their phone cameras and their screens as the lens with which to see the animated Pokemon in the physical world. More sophisticated and immersive applications of both VR and AR can include haptic or physical sensations and olfactory or smelly interactions with the user. As part of her contribution to Seattle Art Museum's Double Exposure exhibition, Black and Choctaw descendant filmmaker, curator, and artist Tracy Rector collaborated with Tlingit artist Nahan to create a virtual reality film that explores the relationship between Native peoples and Seattle, present-day Seattle. Rector states that, quote, film watching is no longer just passive and that there is much more experience building that can be done with film. But to do that, we need to learn how to move people together through space emotionally, using all their senses, end quote. Eagle Bone is a 5-minute video shot in 360-degree views. The narrative begins in Lushootseed, the language of Coast Salish peoples in the Puget Sound area, and segues into a spoken word poem. The poem, written and performed by Nahan, describes being from the land, cultivating a relationship with the land, even when it is buried under a demolished city, which is buried under the present-day city of Seattle. Here is a quick clip, and I hope that this works. This video does not have sound. And I put a little circle there for effect. When one is viewing this in a virtual reality viewer through goggles or a headset, you can look and turn your head around and see all of this happening in real time. The images take the viewer on a tour of local landscapes that begins underwater, through fields of wildflowers, into Pioneer Square in downtown Seattle, and concludes on the beaches of the Puget Sound. The freeform poem describes the act of refusal by Native peoples to fully succumb to the colonial project of cultural assimilation, even as we participate and use the tools of technology to more deeply describe our own existence, activism, and commitment to being stewards of the land. The 2019 Whitney Biennial was a landmark year for the inclusion of Native arts, and the Whitney has since followed up with Mohawk artist Alan Michelson's 4-part augmented reality video series, Wolf Nation. Each of the video installations requires a free downloadable app and incorporates existing sculptures or the physical layout of the Whitney itself. In Town Destroyer, Michelson incorporates archival details of George Washington's 1779 Scorched Earth campaign against the Haudenosaunee, the Mohawk Confederacy. I have a short clip here.
Hanadaganya.
Hanadaganyas. Hanadaganyas. Ranadagarias.
In this video, historic maps, documents, portraits, site markers, and other materials are paired with the voices of members of 6 nations of the Grand River Territory. While Washington's Sullivan campaign is not the most well-known detail of his presidency, it lives vividly in the minds and political realities of the Haudenosaunee peoples who were forced to flee at least 60 villages. Their food and supplies were seized, and their longhouses, orchards, and farms were systematically burned to the ground. The details of how the Mohawk people became refugees in their own territories and how millions of acres of their land were seized are projected onto the now eerily cold and stoic bust of Washington, viewable through the app. Michelson also created Tobacco Field, a site-specific AR experience which transforms the lobby of the Whitney into a flowering tobacco field. The tobacco depicted are variety grown in pre-contact times by the Lenape people of New York. The sacred plant is widely used in ancient and current ceremonies by Native peoples and were grown in farms not far from where the Whitney currently sits. Michelson's use of AR to bring forward little-known histories to a largely non-Native audience highlights the educational aspect and ability of Native art to teach difficult yet necessary histories. When examining Michelson's use of AR technology to critique land loss and Indigenous erasure, MLIS student Isabel Briskin notes that, quote, Michelson evokes what is gone, bringing it into sight, but in a way that serves to emphasize its absence, end quote. Dene photographer and artist Will Wilson focuses on the presence of Native people in his body of work. Wilson's project specifically framed and countered Edward S. Curtis's gigantic documentation project of North American Indian. Wilson has traveled the country, taking portraits of Native peoples in a project titled The Critical Indigenous Photographic Exchange. Wilson engages in a dialogue and works with a sitter as a collaborator of the final image, providing them with an agency not noted in Curtis's project. Wilson's portraits use a similar technology, processing the images onto tin plates. Wilson paired these photographs with an augmented reality component, creating what he calls talking tin types. Originally available through the Layer app, Wilson has since developed his own app that allows the talking tin types to be accessed on one's phone or tablet. Wilson has worked with the QR codes before. However, through an AR app, Wilson has visually embedded video and other media into the photograph, which allows for a fluid transition from the image to the video. Here is another quick clip. That's amazing.
Almost all of them do it. There's a couple that don't. The Day family one doesn't.
That video was Wilson demonstrating for me the functionality of the Layer app and the way the tin types spring to life, much like in a Harry Potter film. Wilson has committed to creating an immense archive of over 2,000 images of Native peoples, comparing the scope of his work to that of Edward Curtis, and is also committed to, quote, disrupting the archive's discursive authority, end quote. The talking tin types give the sitter and the image itself the ability to speak back to the viewer. In early 2021, the MyHeritage app released its Deep Nostalgia feature, utilizing deepfake technology to animate historic static photos of ancestors long since passed. While the deepfakes employed by MyHeritage are not the first digital rendition of dead folks, remember there was that Tupac holographic cameo at the 2012 Coachella, which was questionable. This is the first time that the technology has been made available for everyday people. Only time will tell how Wilson's talking tin types will be placed in comparison to the blinking, silent, reanimated images of our ancestors. And for folks studying this, the comparison and vastly contrasting goals of the projects would be a good place to start. AR and VR do provide a means of shaping our perceptions of and the ways in which we engage with our realities. This is not limited to AR and VR, but is also seen in video games. In the award-winning Anishinaabe artist, game designer, and assistant professor Elizabeth Laponze's game, Thunderstrike, the goal is to protect the land and waters from the snakes that threaten to swallow them whole. Flying through the game as a thunderbird, a powerful supernatural entity, the focus of many Great Lakes history and legends, the player's goal is to reanimate animals displaced and dead while striking the trucks and infrastructure of the extractive oil industry. These engagements preserve and center Native values about what should be included when we are populating and occupying virtual spaces, the archive, or even to remind of painful histories and possibilities for the future. A trait common to all the artists referenced today is the level of skill and mastery in their respective art forms. These skills have been a necessary step for them to be able to translate the customary forms into the digital forms shown today, and to do so with such ease. Their artworks and augmentations showcase a willingness to adapt to the tools and materials we have available, contrast with a largely held stereotype that Native peoples are anti-technology. If our bounded space now includes an online space, then art that incorporates and is an extension of our environment will continue to display and showcase Indigenous ways of knowing in digital formats. This quote is from my late aunt, Clarissa Rizal, who is a master weaver. And she said this to me one time, and I've seen it in print in other places, but it just makes a lot of sense, especially in this context. Alakwa, Gunatish, thank you for listening.
That was great.
Let me stop sharing here. Thank you, Jennifer.
So yeah, at this point, I think if you're done speaking, we can just open it up to conversation and questions and comments. Seems like we have quite a excellent range of guests. So anybody that wants to share their thoughts, please do.
Especially from the folks who are who know these artists, if the artists themselves, if they wanted to respond.
Oh yeah, please.
That is welcome. But and there are just so many different artists working in different mediums that it's really hard to pick just a few. And the thing that I cut out for today was even just looking at how there are artworks that talk about the destructive capacity of technology and on the land. And so I was going to go into that direction, but I figured I'll just, for simplicity's sake, leave it to QR codes and virtual and augmented reality.
And have you put on any, are you organizing any exhibitions with this work, like for the future? Or how are you?
Well,
have you collaborated with other artists in the past?
Yeah, Alison Bremner, who did the painting of the owl. I curated her first solo show here in Seattle. I'm also an independent curator. I didn't put that in as part of my bio, but working with Alison, looking at how she's really a really funny lady. And most folks who are familiar with her artwork are always struck by the amount of humor that is in her work. And just seeing how she, she's always laughing about that she studies Tlingit formline and really works on getting it as precise as she can, and then goes and makes a painting about being on her cell phone in the middle of the night during quarantine, and so she's always juxtaposing these and blending them together in really inspiring ways. Did you have a question, Katie?
Sure, I do. Thinking about Alison and thinking about, I'm just wondering about your experiences in certain exhibitions with the digital components. I'm thinking about the difference between, going to Seattle Art Museum and seeing the Will Wilson talking tintypes and people walking around with their phones and really engaging. It's very engaging. And then there are other museums where they're very wary of including that kind of digital interaction. There's a sense of it's going to take away from any of the other works that are not digital, that are static in some way, or the idea that when you install something like this into a permanent gallery, of course you have to keep the tech working, and in certain museums that's just it's like a slowly deteriorating situation where the tech works less and less and less, and so museums are wary of that. So I was just wondering if you had seen some places where you really enjoyed it. I certainly did at the Seattle Art Museum exhibit, or places where you think, you have to sort of go in one way or the other, or just reflections on that would be great.
Thank you for that. It is a real big balancing act. And so for Preston Singletary's exhibition, which will be opening in DC in January, the tech there is very low tech. It's audio and it's projections, and so it's not even anything that makes the visitor have to download anything to be able to hear the audio. But even that can be cost prohibitive. It can be distracting in some ways, even though we are going for an immersive environment. And so I think we have also that same question in the classroom. classroom, right? Of do we ask people to go to poll everywhere so they can fill out this instant poll and see the classroom response in real time on the screen? But then if we're trying to say, well, limit your technology and listen to me because I'm your instructor, how does that work together, and how do we balance that out? And I really did like the way that the augmented reality was added to the double exposure exhibition, because it wasn't just the talking tintypes. It was also photos, it was labels, it was objects that were dispersed throughout the exhibition. And if there was the little label there that said, you can access more content, then that was a way for folks to really feel like they had some agency in how they move through a space, which I think really goes towards this more egalitarian notion of the curator's role, right? So it's not just our job to put pretty things together and write about them, but really letting the visitor have that that sense of creating their own path through the exhibition. I think that was really effective. I really like the sounds that are able to be conveyed too. And so far, I think that is probably one of the better examples of letting folks be in control of that part. Thank you.
I would just have more of a comment, Dr. Belarde-Lewis, which is that, Chimi Gwetch for this wonderful presentation. I'm just so blown away. And I think the reason I have a comment is because I'm one of these slow processing people. I sleep on things and I let it mull, and, I'll probably have like a few questions for the next time we meet. But right now, I just have to say, I'm just so blown away by the fact that you could have a functional QR code as a textile, and just like what that means in terms of like medium, right? Like I didn't even know that could be possible. And so, yeah, I'm still trying to wrap my head around that and thinking about that. And I see that Velma Key Craig is on the talk today, but I guess what it got me thinking too is if you look at the Kuna and the Mola Dulags that they create, and I don't know, I'm just like, yeah, wondering about that, like how people become master weavers and they create these intricate meanings, and to do that and like to have it, I don't know, as a QR code, it's just quite phenomenal. So I'm just trying to wrap my brain around what that means too in terms of indigenous technologies when we think about the Mola Dulags and things like that. So Chimi Gwetch for this, it's really generative, and you've raised a lot of really intriguing ideas. So I'm so grateful.
Thank you for that. And that really goes back to this idea of what Clarissa Rizal said about how it's always been traditional to be modern, because the technologies, it's really easy to look at digital, like the flash and the speed of digital technology, and to think that it is in such high contrast to traditional technologies or customary technologies and by way of native arts. But that really thinking about weaving specifically, that it is a highly evolved, extremely complex form of indigenous technology, and that it really makes a lot of sense that it would so easily complement the complex nature of digital communication. And so to just try to keep on building on that has been something that has been swimming in my head for a number of years. And so thank you very much for saying that it's going to take a while to process, because I feel like I've been processing this idea for at least 3 years now. And so it is something that when I speak of it with ease, it's because it has occupied a big portion of my brain for quite a while. Hey, Cheryl. You just turned off your microphone. Did you have a comment or a question?
That always keeps happening to me. Thank you so much for this presentation. And I'm not unlike Jennifer with trying to put all of this together and still frame something beyond, you know, a question. Almost at this point, the question seems too small for the amount of information that you have shared with us and real knowledge. But one thing to pick up on, and I was thinking about that when we think about the technology, the virtual reality, et cetera, there's this connotation of speed. And I think you've addressed that in in the discussion you had with Jennifer, like, how do we begin to look at that and how valuable it will or won't be in the future, and thinking and not realizing the amount of time and reflection and the time and reflection and the knowledge of our own cultures that is required to do this kind of work to do this kind of work that does not happen instantly, but that the receivers of that, without knowledge of the culture, is going to think of it as a very quick fix. Do you know what I'm trying to say? So I think there's a lot of room for scholarship in terms of looking at that and saying, again, it goes back to that the quote about being modern and traditional, right? That those expressions are not going to always be the same, but there is something very fundamental about the continuation of the work that's behind the work, is what I'm trying to say. Yeah. So thank you again.
Thank you
very much.
Oh, thank you for saying that. And it is really, because at some level there are competing values, right? And there are competing worldviews, especially when it comes to the ease and the quickness of how information and knowledge is transferred. And so if we're looking at somebody who had to spend years learning how to weave, had to spend, you know, like the apprenticeship that Bremner talks about with the Boxleys, you know, that was 4 dedicated years, and it's still an ongoing process. And so thinking about how long it takes to master those forms to be able to translate it into new forms is really, I think, something that is kind of understood, but really needs to be stated explicitly to really be fit into these frameworks of what is an Indigenous system of knowledge and how is it at work and at play in a space like right now.
Right. And because of, you know, it's because of my interest in weaving, I'm still trying to really get my head around the weaving of the QR. And I'm thinking how much it must have taken time and expertise and real knowledge to do that. We all know the experience of either our own artwork or someone else's, and hearing someone ask the question, gee, how long did it take you to do that? And knowing that how far back in your mind you want to go before you answer that question, you know? And so I was thinking about that too, and just the amount of discipline it's required, the amount of discipline that's actually required for this also.
Did you have something that you wanted to say, Velma?
Well, I appreciated your presentation very much. It introduced me to a lot of other artists that I hadn't previously heard of that are doing work with, you know, technology symbols and technology itself. I really, I heard Will Wilson talk about his tintypes recently, didn't really understand it, and your presentation today really helped me just figure out how amazing that was. I'm like, you scan a photograph and then it comes to life. That's really, really cool. That's really amazing. And yeah, you know, I get the question all the time as about how long a textile takes to be woven, and it's different for every textile. The one that was shown here today was quite quick because it was something that really was like, I mean, you know, I wanted to finish it. And then, as you mentioned, I was commissioned to weave it again, and by then I was bored of it, and that took me much longer. But yeah, I don't know. I work with textiles. I'm here at the Heard Museum, and we spend a lot of time down in the basement with textiles, and what I made the connection today with the textiles from, you know, the 1800s, early 1900s, like in just hearing you speak about, you know, my work and the other artists' work here. We see textiles with, you know, images like lettering, you know, the alphabet, or images that come off of, you know, products, you know, that were marketed back then. And I don't know, I just made the connection, like that's what they were doing. They were doing what I'm doing, you know. They were putting technology, or, you know, what they were picking out of you know, Western culture back then, and putting it on in their work. And that was futuristic. So thank you for your insights.
Oh, that is amazing. I would love to see those sometime too. You know, it's always interesting to see, especially like the railroads. Sometimes there's the railroad insignias that are on there that really shows that movement and trade, and also mobility, right? And so then that mobility that is making these sales, making prosperity possible, and also just commenting on that, you know, we're not stuck in our little corners here. Right? We've always been mobile. We've always been migrants, and just using that form of technology, also the trains, is something that's always influenced us. I see a question from Christopher Green. Hey, Chris, thank you for your presentation. What in your mind are some of the pitfalls for Indigenous artists and the communities who are making use of digital tools, platforms, and spaces? Are there any forms of technology that are just incommensurate with Indigenous values? You know, that's a really tough question, Chris. I think about, I mentioned the deep fake technology that is being used by the MyHeritage app. And so if any of you on social media have seen that, where it shows like the blinking eyes and the turning head of the ancient person in the photograph, it's really creepy. It's cool and it's creepy. But using that deep fake technology now, you know, when Will's Talking Tin type project ages, how is that going to be seen in comparison to the deep fakes of MyHeritage and that app? And also, you know, when we're talking about creating archives now, creating information now, creating images now, what aspects of ourselves are we going to share online? And, you know, for a reference for that is Jennifer Wemikwan's book, A Digital Bundle, because really thinking about what types of cultural knowledge are going to be okay to be shared in these online spaces. And when we talk about the skills and the knowledge that is being passed down for us to be able to create these pieces now, how does that, I don't think we've thought a whole lot about how that is going to be. I don't know if we're taking a full 7 generations look at what our activities are now, especially when we're dealing with digital tools and platforms, because they're so new. We haven't had time to really think about them in generations type of thinking. The other forms of technology that might be incommensurate is the actual technology itself. If we're not taking a look at the destructive capacity of these technologies and how we are benefiting from other people's harm to their landscape, to their environment, to their physical, mental health in these factories that create these iPhones, that create the tablets, that create the computers. You know, if we're not taking a critical look at our participation in that, then it might be the technology itself that is incommensurate with Indigenous values of being stewards of the land. And I don't know if that answers your question, but yeah, it just might come down to the technology itself.
Yeah, hi Miranda, this is Tessa.
Hi, Tessa.
Computer, my screen on, yeah. So I just wanted to kind of comment on that. So one of the questions we asked, I used to work as the curator at the Hebel Cultural Center on the Taleb Reservation, and we always grappled with like, how do we connect our, indigenous culture, navigate within these virtual spaces, and especially how do we uphold, and honor cultural values in the digital world. And we grappled with using QR codes in the galleries, but after discussion, we decided, we didn't see that it was a cultural value because we decided we're an oral culture and the QR codes just didn't make sense. But now seeing this presentation, it changed. I'm just so blown away about how much innovation there is by Native artists, by creating, integrating indigenous our culture within they're making space for themselves, in novel ways. So
Right. And, Dr. Nancy Meithlo even said that before, that nobody can take away your voice. And so if nobody can take away your voice, then nobody can give it back to you. You have to take it. And so creating these spaces for ourselves is really one of the goals that I see, or as a through line for the Native artists that are working in these spaces, is they're saying that we're going to be the ones to define how we participate and what it looks like when we do participate. And so it's going to showcase our points of view. It's going to showcase what we see as important. And it's also going to be a space for us to critique the very thing that we are participating in, which is one of the most amazing things about being alive right now. My niece just said, she's always saying this. Is a young lady in Albuquerque, and she's always saying, what a time to be alive, just kind of like amazed by the abilities that we have now, and the way that we're able to express ourselves. Hey, Sandy.
Hey, I was just thinking about that, I was glad that you mentioned the destruction of technology, and just something I've been thinking about of like the carbon footprint, right? And, just thinking about how, we're contributing to that in different ways, and how technology is a part of that. And so I was glad to hear you mention that. That's one thing that I've been just recently thinking more about.
Mm-hmm. One of the, I was concerned about going over for time, and I'm really glad that I did take it out, but I'm also kind of bummed out. I wanted to talk about Jacob Metters, who is a Maidu artist from California, also in the Phoenix area, Alma. And so then he creates these bird traps that are like almost like fish weirs, where it's these large baskets that are meant to catch birds because they're bird people in California. And he uses Cat5 lines that were dug up that are now surplus. Sometimes people strip the copper out of them, but they're telecommunications trash. And so then you can go buy them by the pound at different places. And so he uses a tree, I can't remember the name of it, but it grows in front of him and my good friend Marisa's house in Phoenix, and it's an invasive species. So in the summertime, he lets it grow because it provides shade in Phoenix, which everybody knows Phoenix needs more shade. And he lets it grow during the summer, and then he cuts it down and uses it to build these gigantic bird baskets, and then weaves them together using that Cat5 line. And so in that way, he's using the invasive species with the telecommunications trash to show that this is us still catching messages, still catching birds, still catching these little, if we think about tweets as little birds flying around, right? Then this is still us receiving and finding ways to make it our own, even though these are destructive elements literally in our backyard.
That's amazing. It's just like so complex, and just layers of like meaning, and yeah, that's what artists do. That's what I love about like thinking about technology and incorporating ways of knowing, and just like how we're living in this space and how we're dealing with what we have. So that's really awesome.
I was glad I could mention him again. I felt bad cutting his slide out, but I wanted to make time for this discussion, and I'm glad that I did.
I wanted to say this too, following up that, you know, you've heard me say before, it's arts and the humanities that will ultimately save us. And technology is ultimately a tool, or very basically a tool. And even though now it looks very sophisticated in this arena, at the end of the day, it's a tool. So I have confidence that while the discussion will continue in Indian country, I don't think we've lost sight of the fact that it's a tool. Not if the artists in our community are using it in this way. So I feel comfort in that. You know, that's creativity in a way that has not been thought about, I think, in relationship to if it's just a tool and it's not going to save us. Yeah, but it can also then be used to save us through the arts and the humanities, not in and of itself.
That's such a great point.
I just want to say, piggybacking off of that, that this is something that I never thought was possible before, because I also teach Navajo weaving to other people. And before, you know, the pandemic, people requested Navajo weaving to be taught virtually, and I just didn't even consider it. I thought that was, you know, I'm like, you can't do it. Well, we had to. And it was not only healing for the participants who were able to do it, you know, and it's still going on, but it was possible, you know, and I was just amazed that people learned how to weave in a virtual format. And so yes, it is a tool. And I also wanted to say that it's fascinating, like just us being here, able to convene like this. I do consider the makers of all of these different platforms that we're able to come together on as artists. You know, they wove together something super intricate that allows this meeting to happen. And I can't fathom that, but you know, there's credit to be given there.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Artists of technology, weavers of technology. And for everybody on this call that is intimately familiar with information science, computer science, you know, this is the application of it to further and to increase our relationality with each other, you know, because for I've only, for full disclosure for everyone on the call, this is the first time that me and Velma have ever been able to speak to each other. And we've emailed back and forth, but so this is already blowing my mind.
That's great. That's great. Well, this was a super interesting presentation and discussion. Yeah, so I just want to thank all of you for joining. This was fantastic.
Yes, thank you all for coming. Is that our curtain call, Dustin?
No, I mean, we can sit here and chat however long you want. You know, I mean, I just wanted to say thanks to everybody for coming, because it really is interesting to hear all of your perspectives. So.
Yep, well, we'll respect everybody's time. Thank you all so much for coming. And I'll be following up definitely with you, Velma, and I'll see you in our meeting next time we get together, Dr. Wemigwans.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, Miranda. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Miranda.
Thank you, Cheryl. Thank you, Dustin.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Thanks, Olivia.
Bye-bye.
A lot to think about.